Hi there, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Royal Jelly, and in this tutorial series we are going to go over photorealism and photorealistic sculptures in ZBRUSH. And basically I wanted to create this series called The Universally Good People, people that I find are completely positive and great role models. And I started with this portrait of Ruth Bader Ginsburg that I'll put on the screen now. And I sort of just threw myself at that project. It was my first ever attempt doing photorealism, and I had such a good time with it that I wanted to continue the series. And this first portrait that we're going to be starting with is going to be Alex Trebek. I'm so excited to do Alex Trebek's portrait because I really wanted something to commemorate him. He was such a role model for me. He was just such a good part of my day every time I would sit down at 7 p.m. and watch Jeopardy with my grandma, and we were both so sad when he passed away that it only feels right that I should do his portrait now. So in this first video of the series, I want to go over what I look for in photo references, and so I've compiled some pictures in Photoshop of photos of him I found on the internet, and I just kind of want to go over what I'm looking for when I've got his picture ready. So let's just dive in. So here we've got some pictures of Alex, and I basically started looking for pictures front on, pictures like this, something that would show me what he looks like in different lighting conditions. That's really important. And then it's also really important to get his picture from the side. You also want to make sure that the ages of the photos are relatively the same. Like, I'm not going to put a young picture of Alex. I mean, it's good to kind of know what he looked like young and without the wrinkles and aging and everything like that, but since I want to do this portrait of him around this age, I didn't include any in this, and this is just gonna be my guide for what I go to sculpt. So I'll kind of go through, and I've just got my layers here. I am going to draw over them with some colors. I'll just start with blue. That should be good. And there are a couple things that I'm going to be looking at. The first is the shape of his head. Like, there's no other way to say that other than I'm going to look at the shape of this man's head and sort of analyze it. And so I can see this is sort of a good picture for me to start with, because here we've got, you know, the round ball shape, and then his brow ridge comes out a little bit, but not too much. I've definitely seen like more prominent brow ridges in men. Men tend to have like a really protruding brow, but Alex's doesn't look like it's too protruding. He's got a nice cheekbone here, and he doesn't have a lot of indentation along the side of his face. His face generally looks pretty smooth here. Like, you can see this line on the side of his face is the same as this line, and it's pretty flat. His chin has a nice little divot right here, and then it goes pretty flat. So we can see in here, that's where that divot comes into play, and then that's where it's flat. It looks a little bit more rounded here than in the other one. But here, so you can see when he's kind of smiling, it flattens out a little bit. So there's the divot, there's the flat. The overall shape, I would say his face is fairly rectangular, like from his hairline down. It's fairly rectangular except for in this chin area, so we're definitely gonna pay attention to the chin. In terms of his nose, let's see, there's not like a, maybe we should go to the side for the nose. It's pretty straight. He's got a nice ridge here, and then this sort of comes down pretty smoothly. We can pay attention here to these highlights, and that's going to tell us a lot about the form. There's a nice highlight here and here. So it's a pretty rounded nose, and his nostrils are fairly long. His wrinkle here, I don't really know any of the names for what these are called. I think this is called the nasal labial fold, but I'm just going to call it his nose line, his smile line, basically. I know you can do a lot of research about what each of these areas of the face are, but for me, it's kind of it's more about what it looks like than being able to name everything. it's pretty deep. It's a pretty deep line. And you can see here with this different lighting, we're getting a lot of information about how there's a lot more volume in this section of his face. And then this wrinkle line sort of comes down a little bit. And then it flows right into the corner of his mouth, which is also a pretty deep area of flesh in terms of how this form is described. And I'm just kind of drawing these curvatures along the sides so that I can kind of tell where it starts to flatten out and where it looks really curved. And it's like especially curved here along the mouth. Another thing that I'm noticing is that the divot underneath the nose, again, I do not know the words for all of these things, so I'm just going to call it the divot. And I know based on my makeup tutorials that I watch sometimes that this is called the Cupid's bow. He's got a fairly wide Cupid's bow, and that's really distinctive. He's got, it kind of makes his smile so lovely. Just the fact that well, I'm trying to find it. Maybe it's not really in these pictures, but here it's nice. This little part of the lip is like just a very lovely shape. So we can sort of describe the shape there with the lip. And then this part is really wide. He's got a really wide upper lip divot in that area. Then the ridges next to his lips are pretty curved. Here's this sharp line again with all of this curvature. And then it tightens up a lot right here in the corner of his mouth. It gets really tight. Let me just erase some of these other lines that we don't really need to see. The next thing I'll look at are just more areas of detail. His eyes. This part of the lid actually comes down really far. Like his eye ends right here, but this swoops a lot more down, and he's got a lot of skin and tissue up in here, and then of course that goes into the crow's feet. This shape is there's a lot of volume right in there. He doesn't have too big of under eye bags, but there is a little bit of under eye, just like the way that this sort of comes down, and you can see the bridge of his cheekbone sits right there, and that comes out nicely to meet this side of his face. Yeah, his brows, there's definitely a lot of volume in his brows, so it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to make sure in 3D that all of this geometry is sitting nicely above, or like it protrudes out from his eye. So there we have his eye, and then there's all this extra tissue right around the corner of his eyes. And that's an aging thing. Like the older people are, the more gravity affects the way that their eyes sit under their skin. Obviously, we've got the brow lines, one there, two deep ones right there, and then the bridge of his nose comes here. There's this shape. And then the nose, I like to kind of break up into a few different pieces. Into this area, the nostril, and then the tip. And that's kind of where the cartilage ends. So that naturally has sort of a different break to it. Whoops. I also look a lot at the forehead. Let's see if we can get some good forehead definition somewhere. I mean, he's making an expression here, and I don't yet know what expression I want him to be making in the portrait, but I'm guessing it's going to be sort of a neutral smile, because that's the classic Trebek look, is a closed-lipped smile. Maybe if I move this down, we can get some good forehead information. Here are those lines again, the deep ones. Here's all that skin tissue around the corner of his eye into the folds here. And we can see this is a really nice picture for these details. We get a lot more skin lines. And then there's like the really delicate skin lines right there, and we can add all those details in once we get the form going. More of that skin here. Yeah, his forehead seems pretty flat. He doesn't have like a big, sometimes people have like a big divot in this area where their brow meets the temple, but his is kind of like pretty straight into the temple area, and then the hairline is still pretty flat, and that's kind of what's giving him that rectangular look, is like he's got a really flat hairline into a squared, like here's this line here is so straight into the temple. And again, yeah, like not a ton, like there's not like an area here where there's a big divot. His face is pretty smooth and flat. Not when he's smiling, of course. All of that tissue gets pushed up. But here we can actually see where his cheekbone is. Like you can see that this whole area is highlighted. So that's going to create a really nice shape for us to put in this little, see how it's kind of divoted right here? There's like an indentation right here, which flows down into his jaw. And then the jaw has some extra tissue underneath. But there's this divot here, and then that cheekbone sits right in here, and then everything kind of comes down off of that cheekbone and flows sort of in this way. And then we can continue with the folds into the eye area over the cheekbone. And then I'm also getting a really good sense of the way that his eye flows into his nose from looking at it here. Here you can see there's the corner of his eye, and this is like knowing this amount of distance from the eye to the bridge of the nose is going to be really useful. And then it's a pretty straight, it goes down a little bit right here into the nostril, but it's also a pretty rectangular nose. Here's where the cartilage ends in this shape right here into the nostril. But yeah, so we're sort of looking at all of the underlying forms of the face, observing how his like cheekbones sit on his face, and just all of the anatomy that lives under the face. And then just with some of these smaller pictures, we get a really good sense of this overall shape of like squared off on top a little bit more, and then more rounded on the bottom with a really prominent chin. And this line here plays a big part in what makes him look like him. You can see that line in every single one of these pictures. Why is my brush not working? Oh, whoops, I was drawing on a layer by accident. There we go. Oh, and here's another really good area of detail right here, where that is this divot. This divot. It happens right here, and then this is starting to kind of come outwards. I think maybe this is one of the more later images, because I'm seeing some puffiness right here that I'm not seeing in some of the other ones. He definitely kind of like looks a little bit puffier, and that can obviously be from the cancer treatment. But it's also good to know that he in some images, he has this extra volume here around his face, and that kind of leads to more of that rounded look on the bottom. It's not so puffy in this one. In this one, he's kind of got like a really smooth, the jawline, like even from his ear. Let me just erase some of those lines. His ear pulls right into the smoothness of his jawline. And even these lines are going to be so nice to add into the portrait, showing that like we're really paying attention to the way that his ear just kind of softly sits above his jaw. And then, so this is sort of like the overall look of his face. And these are lines that I'm going to find useful when I come back and refer to this over and over and over. Here we can see his jaw, his hairline into more of a rounded forehead here. Yeah, rounded at the top into a flat line. It's also worth noting where his hairline actually falls, which seems to be in this sort of a general shape. So I'll keep coming back to these references. I'm going to have these references up when I'm sculpting. The last thing that I wanted to show you is the base mesh that I'm going to be starting out with. This is just a base mesh that I downloaded from the internet, and I'll put the link to this base mesh in the comments. But this is what I'm going to be starting with, and then hopefully we'll be able to turn this guy into Trebek in no time at all. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye.